Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MyCom Screencast on how to improve your church's web presence. My name is Eric Cyberling, and this is the second of 3 sessions on different ways that you can make sure that your church is up online in a good way that can help you connect with your community. So today we're going to focus on building your website. So last screencast, we talked a lot about how to define your content. Who are we trying to reach and what information are they looking for, and ultimately how should we start to organize our website? Today we're really going to talk about how to build your website instead. And so it's really focusing on what platform or the technology that you can use, and then what is the best way to build it. And that includes both the layout and the writing. And so this is really kind of digging deep into the area that most people struggle with. And so we're going to just take a step-by-step approach. We'll examine the technologies and really look to see what is the best for your specific situation. When we think about the different technologies that we can use, there are many of them out there, and we're only going to cover some of the most popular ones. What we really need to do is to sit back, assess our needs, and then be able to evaluate the different technologies and find out what is the best one for your church. You may want a technology that is also connected to your membership database or your financial systems or those kinds of things, and that may cause different choices. But what we're going to talk about here is some of the most popular and common ones that would help most churches. So we first need to start by analyzing our needs. And so this starts with the site map that we created and we talked through last screencast. And this really represents the content that we would end up having in the general organization. So the best way to think about it is it's kind of the menu up at the top and the drop down. And while this isn't a one-to-one connection for that, I think it really talks about the priorities, the objectives, and kind of the key questions that people have. So we take a look at that, and then what we start to do is we start to look at requirements. So when we look at the welcome home, for example, say, okay, we want a friendly welcome. And so, do we want to have slider functionality that walks through different images and calls to action that walk through that will give people a general overview of the church? There's some discussions around sliders of whether that's the right way to go or not quite as friendly, especially now that we enter into much more mobile websites. But that's where you need to do the homework and take a look at some of the trends and design trends and say, does this make sense? As we look at, on the welcome page, we want to have a prayer request. So, of course, there needs to be a way for them to respond. So contact forms. Providing a sermon example or a church video walkthrough, it's okay, we need a way to host videos or maybe even have an internal sermon library. And whether that's being able to embed something from YouTube or you want to use something where you actually host the videos on your website, there's different considerations for that. I think start simple and then move forward. But there's, again, this is how you kind of walk through your church map, your content map, and then start to decide what makes the most sense. For example, you look down at service times and directions, do you want to embed a Google map in there? And that's usually a good idea. We look at the portfolio of activities, of do we want a photo portfolio with descriptions and so on. And what this really ends up helping you do is start to get to a kind of a laundry list of different requirements that you have. For example, a calendar of events. So, do we need a plugin that ends up being able to have an easy to update calendar? Do I want to use our Google Calendar? Let's say that the church uses that, or maybe it's Office 365, and then you can display that into your website. But it really is taking a look at what you want. Do you want a members-only section of the site? Do you want a particular log-on and password that people have to register for? These are all different things that you have to look at. Newsletter, do you use Constant Contact, and do you need a technology that connects in with that? And then a blog is something that I would call mandatory for every single church. Because what you're going to find, especially as we go into our third screencast, is a blog is really important in order to help you drive connections to search engines. And so we'll talk about that next screencast. The bottom line is if you really want full control and options, use WordPress. WordPress offers a really extensive list of capabilities that you can use. There's lots of development in there. But the thing is, it also requires much more technical expertise and it's much harder to get the website up. So if you have some tech-savvy volunteers, if you have people that are really interested in that or very knowledgeable about WordPress, it could be a good idea to go and move forward with that. But if not, try using a template-based web provider first. There are many different ones that provide a basic outline that is what you see is what you get. You can drop and drag different pieces of the website together. You can just type in the title and type in the body copy, and it makes it very easy. So it's really, I think that's the first choice of what level of comfort does your volunteers have, and then say, okay, do we want to use WordPress, or would we like to use a template-based service, or at least try to use a template-based service first? This is just one example of many of a church website created in WordPress, and it used the saved template. So there are a number of church templates out there that you can find, and really you can go through and just in Google type WordPress church templates, and it'll give you a very large list. If you see the URL down at the bottom of the screen, there's just a number of examples. These are WordPress created sites that you can go and take a look at. So here you see in the Church of the Good Shepherd here, it actually is a video background, so it plays a short video underneath. It provides a connection in with Google. It's got the directions and so on. And so again, in WordPress, you can do a large number of things. Your second option really, again, is templated websites, and there are a large number of them, but I'm going to talk about 3 of them. These are kind of the major providers, but there are many others and a number of them which are specifically targeted at churches, and it's worth taking a look, and there's pros and cons for each. But today what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about Wix, Weebly, and SquareSpace, as those are probably the 3 biggest providers in the market. So as you think about Wix, and many people have heard the commercials with Wix, and it's simple drop and drag, and they have lots of different design options, including video backgrounds. It's very popular, and because of that, there's a lot of support. There's a lot of templates out there. There's a lot of things you can use. It is also very user-friendly. There's the ability to try different things and then see how they look. It also has comprehensive support tools and a lot of how-to videos. And that's really important because there's a lot of times you can get stuck, and really a search in YouTube can really help you. The other thing that Wix has that most others don't is it has an artificial design intelligence, or ADI, which prompts you through a number of questions, and then it starts to design a website for you. It makes it relatively easy to get started. Now, but there are a few cons. So one of them really is that once you adopt a template and you move forward with that, the problem is you can't change it. And so what ends up happening if you end up picking a template, if it after a while it's not supported, you may have to go back and rebuild your site again, and that can be hard. Second con of it really is it only allows 2 levels of navigation. So you can, for example, if we went back to our sitemap and you see where it says grow, you could have children's ministry as kind of the next layer down, but then what you couldn't do in the navigation is then be able to have like VBS and Sunday school and so on. So it's limited in its navigation, but most churches should only need 2 levels of navigation, unless you're really building a complicated site. There are some links down at the bottom here that not only show the church templates for Wix, but as well as there's an article that I ended up finding. It says 2012 in the URL, but it was actually updated in 2020 around some different beautiful church websites. As you're starting to consider different templated options, look at the different sites that are out there. And similar to what we did when we started to look at the content map, it's don't be afraid to take a look at different churches and say, hey, I really like this idea, and use that to start building kind of a sketch of your design. The second option out there is Weebly. And Weebly really is the simplest out there of these templated programs. It's very simple drop and drag builder, and it has a lot of good design themes. It also has more navigational flexibility, so you can have a deeper, larger site. So instead of only having 2 levels of navigation, you can have much more. It also ends up providing guides in order to do search engine optimization. And why that's important is that you can have a website, but Google has to find you for other people to find you. And so that's really helpful to have. The other thing that in Weebly, as compared to the others, is it's very simple in Weebly to add a members only area to the site. Others, you have to install plugins, you have to do additional work, but here you can end up creating a members-only area, for example, prayer requests, membership directory, and so on, to make it very simple. The other thing Weebly ends up providing is it's got some blogging and marketing tools that are more advanced than what you see in Wix, and so you can end up purchasing some of those as part of your subscription in order to be able to do some more advanced things more simply. Some of the cons are it doesn't quite have the AI-guided design of Wix. And the other problem is if your site crashes during an update, if you want to restore it to the last live backup, you're going to have to contact support. And that may be minor things. Most of the time, these things are very stable, but it's just something to be aware of. There's also URL. This is winningwp.com. And it has examples of websites using Weebly. And so it has both church and non-church examples. And the reason you want to take a look at those is because it shows you what Weebly can do. And so you look through the sites, and if you see a section of the site you think this is really cool, print it out, do a sketch of it, and duplicate that in your design for your church. The last one we'll talk about today is SquareSpace. And SquareSpace, I'd say it's the pretty option. SquareSpace was originally designed for online portfolios, particularly for photographers and designers. And so it is an absolutely beautiful site template to use and really supports that. The thing is, it's really best suited for churches that have an experienced web designer or someone that really has a design eye. You have much more options. You can make it, things really beautiful, but you really need an eye for design for it. Now, building a site in Squarespace is much more technical and less intuitive than the drop and drag builds of Wix and Weebly. So again, it's a little bit more difficult. Again, it depends on where you fall in the spectrum of technology and design experience. But the thing is, Squarespace is very customizable, so it may feel a little overwhelming to some. Again, there's another link at the bottom that shows 20 different websites built with Squarespace that you can take a look at and really understand. The bottom line of all of this is the best technology is the one that you can maintain. There have been a number of sites that have been created that are beautiful, and they got a lot of help even if it was from an outside vendor. And where churches struggle is then they struggle with keeping it up to date. And so you want to pick something that you can build, but most importantly, you need to pick the one that you can maintain longer term, because otherwise you're going to fall into the same kind of a abandoned church view that we talked about in the first screencast. Once we've selected a technology, now we've got to build the site. Just like an Amish barn raising, it's not one person building the barn or building the website. You need someone to kind of lead the technical development of it. But when you think about the information that is on the website, it really does take a number of different volunteers in order to not only get the site up the first time, but also to keep it up to date. The first thing you have to do is you have to select and register your domain. And so there's lots of different registry engines, register.com, GoDaddy.com, and others. But really what you want to do is you want to create a short domain that's easy to remember. Now, you can take a look at some options. So Wapakoneta First United Methodist Church, you could have that all written out, or wapakonetafirst.umc.org, but it's just longer. And so if you can come up with a way to keep it shorter, then you're better off. Just like HopeCityCommunityChurch.org as compared to HopeCity.org. So you may want to take a look at ways that maybe fit your specific church instance that can just be easy to remember. You keep it down to 2 to 3 words. The other issue on this is avoid abbreviations if at all possible. If we take a look at the second example, Wapakoneta First United Methodist Church, let's go with WFUMC.org. It may be shorter, but especially for new people, they're not going to remember it. And so you're much better off saying, okay, go to wapakfirst.org. And people go like, oh, okay, they remember that. Go to WFUMC.org, and people just have a hard time to remember it. Now, when you register your site, make sure that you own both the .com and the .org and the .church domains. So spend the money, get all of that, guide everything to whether you want it the .org or the .church domains, but get all three, because there are a lot of times we forget. And instead of putting in, wapakonetafirst.org, I put in wapakonetafirst.com, and it may go nowhere. Spend a little extra money to keep those registered, but it's pretty wise to do so. And then keep it to 2 to 3 words, so keep it simple. The second is if you're on WordPress, you have to set up hosting. And so you need to find a hosting service like Bluehost or GoDaddy in order to host your site. This is the computer that basically your website is on, that the internet directs them to be able to find the website, and it keeps it up. The cost can be between $5 and $12. You can get some more advanced elements. Know that that's one of the expenses that we end up facing in that. Sometimes you can also get your hosting and your register URL at the same place. The next thing that you want to do is you want to create a rough sketch of every page on your website. So look at other websites for ideas and then post them up on a single wall. So you may want to have a wall in your church, kind of like the planning room for your website. And you put your sitemap up there and then sketch every single page and what it's going to look like. And then take pieces of string and show, okay, if I click here, then it goes to this page. Or if I click here, it goes to that page. And then once you get all those pages designed, then ask someone new that hasn't been involved in the project and say, go to the website and say, could you find out when our worship services are? Where would you find what the last week's sermon was about? Where would I look for the newsletter? Where would I look for different things? And then ask people to look for it, kind of tracing the string on the yarn. And that's a good way to test your site design and then just see if the layout makes sense. As you start to go through and you say, okay, now I have my sketch, and it's like, okay, I need a plugin here for, let's say, Google Maps. The best way to find the right design templates and plugins is just search for it. And so, for example, if you're on Wix, you'd say best 2020 church websites Wix and find out what templates they used. Look at the templates and say, okay, how do we need to adapt our wireframe to it? The other thing is for WordPress, you can look, there's themeforest.net, which has got a number of different templates on there as well. But you can do the same thing for not only templates, but you can also do it for plugins as well. So understand what technology you already use in the church and how you want it to connect to the website, and then see if there's a template that exists for it. Now, the hardest part really is building the page content. And so you need to define what is needed for every page in the copy, meaning the words, pictures, etc. And then assign an owner for each page. Take all of that and collect everyone's input and then have one editor to put it in a consistent tone and appropriate length. Whether I write or someone else writes, you have to try to create that website into a single voice. And that takes a lot of time. And so what you want to do is you want to have one person on your, if you can, one person that will focus on getting it in the right tone, and then another person to make sure the grammar is correct and so on. Usually, like we always used a retired English teacher because it was very helpful. The other thing that you want to do is you want to look at the copy and reflect what the keywords are that people will search on. So let's say you have a preschool in your building. You want to make sure that you have that keywords, in a number of places on the site, and then you've got links back and forth to that. So, that will help on the search engine optimization. The absolute toughest part of the website is getting everything written. Here is just a simple way that we've used in order to help people kind of as a writing prompt to get them to move forward. So first, what you want to do is for the ministry leaders, let's say I'm responsible for a page, is you want to just ask some basic questions. So, be like, okay, who's this for? What's the event or activity? What's the date and the time of the event? Or what is the date and time you regularly meet? Where will it be located? Be specific and do not assume that someone knows the location. So you could say, oh, it's in Keller Hall, but if you don't attend the church, you may not know what Keller Hall is. How is what action do you want them to take? How do they sign up, participate, engage? What do they need to prepare or purchase where in order to feel prepared? Then answer the question of why people should sign up in the first place. Don't assume they know the answer. This gets really interesting because a lot of times we have events and activities in our church that we're very familiar with. But in particular, if we're trying to reach out to new people or people that have recently joined the church, we need to make it very simple for them to engage. I'm going to give you one example, and it's called Dartball. And so Dartball was a game that's played at a lot, or not a lot, but at least rural churches in Ohio, where you throw these big darts at big corkboard, and that's how it's basically a baseball game. 3 outs and you're out, and so on. We went to this church and had no idea. Everyone's like, join Dartball. I'm like, what is it? So this is just an example of what we wrote. So Dartball is open to everyone inside and outside the church that wants to play. So you didn't have to belong to the church. It's a game, here's the explanation, where darts are thrown on a large wooden board that resembles a baseball field with colored areas that denote bases. uses baseball rules and so on, and the church is part of a regional league that plays once a week from October to April with a championship at the end. Then you see the when, practice on Tuesday, games on Thursdays, and then so on. How do they sign up, and even why? Why should someone join? Now, this really acts as input to be able to turn it into 60-word summary. So this is just one example, that 60-word summary, and even some of the visuals that we have that start to bring it to life. It doesn't describe everything, but it gets you started. Then create a longer form explanation, but keep it under 250 to 300 words for each of the activities. So we took this same information and we put it in two places. One, we created a half-page information sheet. So if you use the front and the back that you've seen, and we printed those out. So we had that at our Welcome Center. But the other thing is we ended up cutting and pasting this into our website, and we did it for all the activities. So as activities came on board or someone wanted to launch a new ministry, we always had them fill this out, and that way we could get an activity sheet at the Welcome Center, as well as we could have one on the website. It feels a little onerous, but as you start to see some of these examples, it's pretty straightforward. And then as you have a common editor, they tend to get into a rhythm of writing it once all the information is provided. The big thing is, when it comes to developing your website, that YouTube is your friend. This is where, whether it's WordPress, Wix, Weebly, or anything else, there are a number of videos to show you how to build the site, install a plugin, or configure a widget in any of the major web platforms. And that's the one reason why it is good to use one of the mainstream templated websites, because there is so much help out there. As you go and design your website, these are the big catch-alls that you really need to make sure that you have. Make sure on the front page that you have the service times, the address of the church, directions or a connection to Google Map, and a phone call to ask questions. You would be surprised how many times that when we have secret shop different churches, that they didn't have the service times on the front page, or worse yet, they had the wrong times because they were on summer hours and so on. So you need to make sure that this is right. Also, make sure that it's easy to find some sort of about us or introduction to the church and what you stand for, what to expect on Sunday morning, and what you believe. The last thing that you want to have happen is someone shows up to the church and they end up being surprised. Some final thoughts on website development, and we've covered a lot of information here. The first is really be brief. You have 5 to 8 seconds to capture someone's attention on the front page. So you need to be very clear, very focused, and very visual. Keep it simple. You have to maintain the site. There are a lot of different things that you can do in order to make your website come to life and really dynamic, but the problem being is you also have to keep it up. It must be mobile. Please make sure that each of the templates that you use uses what's called a responsive template. It's really important because over 60% of people will use smartphones in order to find you. Keep the information current. Nothing is worse than showing up late because it's worship summer hours. Also, cross-link pages. So as you're writing the copy, how do you start to have highlights or URLs or links that go to different areas of the site that people could be interested in? And then finally, always keep improving. The first design will never work. You'll always end up finding problems. You'll find things you didn't think about. And so you have to go back and fix it. So always keep improving. Just don't assume because you've launched the website that it's great. We've now talked about building our site. So that's the end of the second screencast. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, after you've built your site, the last thing we're going to talk about is how do you help get found? And so this is really important because you can build it, but people won't naturally come. You've really got to make it easy to find you. And that's what we're going to talk about the next screencast. So we hope to see you there. As always, don't hesitate to send me any questions. It's eric@brokensheep.com, or make a comment below, and I'll try to respond as fast as possible. Thank you so much, and God bless.